So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's topic and speaker. Ann Perkins has been a garden club member since 2010. She's the owner of Headacre Farms and has been gardening since the age of 4. So in those years, she has left a trail of gardens behind her in places as varied as Florida and Alaska. And she was doing this while she followed her husband in his career. Settled back in Maine since 2001, she is now able to devote herself to full-time gardening and is enjoying every minute of it. And as Julia mentioned, today Ann will discuss how home gardeners can successfully propagate plants and seeds and will demonstrate her tips and techniques. So it is my pleasure to welcome Ann Perkins to the Camden Garden Club's Winter Horticultural Series.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for this opportunity. This is a great way to learn about different horticultural topics and see what other gardeners do. And I hope you'll enjoy this and you'll get something out of it. Let me start my screen here and get going, and hold on a minute. I'm not as very technically savvy. Does everybody see that?
Perfect. It looks great.
Great. So the fancy topic for this talk is propagating plants from seed, but I prefer to think of it as seed starting 101. My aim today is to introduce to you my methods and sort of the background of what I want to say about growing plants from seed. Just a note, you may hear my very naughty dog Horatio barking in the background, and I hope you'll forgive him. So it's that time of year. Hold on a minute, let me get this. It's that time of year. There's still snow on the ground. We had a miserable rain yesterday, but spring really isn't far off. Our gardens and our garden dreams lie just underneath this layer of snow. And in a month, it's hard to believe, but we'll be slogging through the mud to start our gardening. And sure, there'll be other storms, but now's the time to begin starting seeds for the coming growing season. If you already start some or all of your seeds, this may not be the talk for you necessarily, because you're already comfortable with seed starting techniques and practices. I hope you might be able to take something away from this, however, and I hope you'll share some of your experiences with me. If you're new to seed starting, I'm glad you're thinking about starting your own plants from seed, and I hope this presentation will help you dive right in. I too was hesitant to start my own seeds as a young gardener, but over the years I've developed my own techniques. Each gardener has his or her own practices, and as you become more adept at this, you'll find what works for you. Now, I'm very opinionated, those of you who know me, and about my own practices. So don't think that what I do is what you must do. It's just to get you started. So why start your own seeds? So there are so many reasons. It's lots of fun. I enjoy it, frankly. You can choose interesting and different varieties of plants to grow rather than rely on what the garden shops and nurseries have to offer. You can swap seedlings with friends. And importantly, you control what goes into your seedlings when it comes to soil, fertilizers, and pesticides. Many garden centers have to treat their seedlings to maintain their health, and growing your own seedlings frees you from this. I like starting my own plants from transplant because I can most efficiently use the space in my growing beds with exact placement of transplants. I also don't have to take the time to thin seedlings, and I don't waste seed that way. Every year I start thousands of seeds for the farm. With the exception of parsley and alyssum, I grow every seed I use at the farm or sell as seedlings. Each vegetable, flower, and annual herb are started either as seedlings for transplant or I plant them directly in the ground. You can do this too, but at a level that suits you. So you can see here Horatio, who's on the right, and we're in the middle of transplanting onions and some other, and looks like kales into the ground. So these are seedlings that have been transferred over to the farm. As an aside, we're really blessed in our area with a number of wonderful seedling suppliers. In addition to places like Barley Joe, Guinea Ridge, and Moose Crossing, there are a lot of local farms like mine that make early season money by selling seedlings. If your own seeding doesn't go well, you have these to fall back on. So let's start talking about seeds themselves. To me, the miracle of a combination of a seed, some soil, the sun, and water producing a plant never ceases to amaze me. I think of seeds as hope in a paper packet. I can't emphasize that enough. So I hope most of you have already purchased your seeds for this season. If not, you should be able to find seeds at hardware stores, nurseries, and even places like Walmart and Ocean State. In the future, I'd advise that the earlier you order or purchase your seeds, the better selection you will have. Places like Johnny's have limited their sales to commercial growers like me until later on this month. So it's with everybody wanting to grow stuff these past couple of years, it's been quite amazing. So I order my seeds as early in the winter as I can, and I mostly order from Maine and New England seed suppliers like Johnny's, Fedco, where I'm a member, Pine Tree, and High Mowing. I also order seed from Territorial Seed out west. There are a lot of other great seed companies out there in addition to the ones we grew up with, like Burpee and Gurney's. There are specialty flower, vegetable, and herb catalogs out there as well, like Thompson and Morgan. So you can find all sorts of seed suppliers with a quick Google search. They're usually very happy to send you a catalog if you request one. Now, seeds are getting really expensive and sometimes scarce, so share them with a friend or two. Usually there's enough seed in a packet to share, and Fedco also gives group discounts if you order seeds together. And one of the nice things is seed suppliers like Pine Tree sell smaller quantities for less money. So if you only need 15 seeds of some variety, you can get that for around $1.95 rather than paying $5 to $6 for a packet elsewhere. This is especially important for seeds that don't hold their viability longer than a year or two. Sometimes it's more economical to buy your seeds in a large pack for something like tomatoes or lettuce, which will last a longer time. So pay attention to the quantity of seed you're ordering. Make sure you order enough for your needs. For example, if you want to plant 75 of the same nasturtium, make sure you buy more than just one packet of 35 seeds. And don't order too many. We all fall into that trap of plant and seed lust. So keep track of what you order and keep track of what types of seeds you will need, and make sure you order what you need. So when my seeds arrive, it's like Christmas. There's nothing like opening up that box and checking off what's arrived. I always look to see what's been back ordered and out of stock at the last minute. And then I make a note to look for that seed from another supplier if it's available. So you want to organize your seeds so that they're easy to retrieve and they stay dry, cool, and safe. I use a plastic tub that seals for each of my seed collection. You'll see the whole group of them in a few minutes, except for really big things of seed. I use separate tubs for flower seeds, herb seeds, and vegetable seeds. And then within the tubs, I order the seeds alphabetically by crop. I haven't figured out a better way to call it, which means like beans, green, or zinnias. And then within each crop, I organize the packets alphabetically, again by variety. It makes it really, really easy to find them. And I'm a recovering accountant, so you'll have to forgive me for this excessive organization. So I store my seeds in a corner of my office where it's cool and the sun doesn't get to them. I also throw those little packets of moisture absorbers that you get in pairs of shoes into the tubs rather than throw them out. This helps collect some of the moisture that might get into the tubs inadvertently. So before I store my new seed for the season, I mark all the old packets with colored tabs so I can keep track of how old the seed is. And I also go through the tubs and remove all the old out-of-date seed, the ones that are not viable, so I'm not storing things needlessly. So one of the things that's important to remember is that each type of seed varies in how long it's good for, and that's called viability. Some seeds can be used for 3 to 5 years or even longer. Archaeologists find seeds and try to plant them, and it's just fascinating that they can last thousands of years. But the long-lasting seeds are ones like, I think, lettuce and tomato are good. Others are only good for 1 or 2 years, like onions and spinach. How you store your seed is important too. The more carefully it's stored, the longer it'll last. How a seed is treated, i.e. pelleted, coated, etc., also affects its viability. For instance, a pelleted lettuce seed is supposed to be used within a year. An unpelleted seed will last 5 or 6 years. So I've had good luck with 2- and 3-year-old pelleted lettuce seed, but I wouldn't rely on it. If you're in doubt about a seed's viability, you can do a germination test, which is pretty easy. There are instructions on how to do that online. Just look for a video or an article about it. So I'm not going to go into that now. As well, there are charts of seed viability online in a number of places. So seed viability is really important because you don't want to waste time, energy, and money on a seed that won't grow.
And we actually just had a question come in.
Yeah.
Jim, did you happen to mention if when you are harvesting your own seeds, or if you have seeds that need to get stored like for a longer period of time, such as over the winter, would you be putting them in the freezer at all, or just having them in that cool area that you mentioned earlier? What about the freezer?
The freezer is really good for long-term storage. So if I was interested in saving seed for emergencies and it wasn't my regularly used seed, I would definitely throw it in the freezer. The key there is to make sure it stays dry. I don't, as a matter of course, store my seed in the freezer. There are some seeds, however, that benefit from getting thrown in the freezer, like shiso. So shiso, as soon as I get a packet of shiso seed, it goes into a plastic bag and right into the freezer because it needs a specialty treatment. So you can put your seeds in the freezer. My freezer is full of vegetables.
Thank you for clarifying that.
That answers that.
Yes, we actually also had another question that directly relates to some language you used. Joette asks, what does pelleted or unpelleted mean, and how can you tell the difference?
I'll get into that later in the
Okay,
talk. I'll show some examples.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So you can do a germination test, right? We talked about that. So thank you, Horatio. So there are 3 very, very important things to remember right from the start when you're thinking about starting seeds. The first is that some plants should only be started for transplant, and some should only be started directly into the ground. To confuse you further, some plants can be stored both ways. So what I did here is I took a photograph of a page from the Johnny's catalog, and that gives you a guide to directly seeded vegetable crops, which are things you'd plant right in the garden, and then transplanted vegetable crops. Things like beans, beets. Why would you want to start them? Because you don't really need to. Things like broccoli, though, you can sow them directly into the ground, but I prefer to start them as seedlings so that I can place them precisely. And you'll see later on in some of the slides what the farm looks like. I'll get to flower seeds and herb seeds later on. There are similar charts for those things. Annual herbs are mostly started from seeds. Some you will directly sow, but any seed, we'll get into where you find that information. Those that should be started as seedlings also include plants that need a longer growing season than we have here. Tomatoes, for example, take some time to fruit and mature. So if we were to plant a tomato seed right into the ground when it was warm enough, we wouldn't get tomatoes until September, and who wants that, right? We want to have a tomato at the end of July if possible. So by planting tomatoes early as seedlings and growing them, by the time you plant them out, you will have gained 2 or 3 weeks of growth time to maturity. And we'll talk about days to maturity in a little bit too. Seeds you shouldn't start ahead of time. include things that either don't like to be transplanted, like cilantro, which has a tendency to bolt or go to seed when transplanted. And some of you may have had that problem. Cilantro also is one of those things you can plant in a tight row. You don't have to worry about thinning. That's planted like spinach or greens mixes. There are other things like beets, which you can start as transplant, but really, do you really want to transplant all those beets into the ground when it's much easier to start a furrow and plant a seed? So I talked about shiso really quickly. So some seeds need a period of cold in order to germinate properly. A number of flowers like to be sown early in the spring or the previous fall, and they refuse to be treated as seedlings. Another thing I wanted to mention is that there are plants that you can start as a seedling, like cabbage, but if you keep it as a seedling for too long, it will refuse to grow once it goes into the ground. It just will not produce. So the best time to transplant a cabbage, for example, is when it has 3 to 4 true leaves. That's kind of an advanced thing, but if you have questions, you can ask Julia or let me know via email.
Paula actually wanted to know if there's a particular reason that alyssum should not be grown from seed.
Oh, alyssum should also, you can grow however you want. You could toss alyssum up in the ground, up in the air, and let it fall and it would grow. Alyssum is a very tiny seed, and it's a very tiny seedling. And it's one of those things where you want to put 3 or 4 into a 6-pack, but it actually grows beautifully. And at the farm, I line all my beds with alyssum because I need so much of it, though. I have a grower grow it for me because I simply don't have the room.
Okay.
So I adore alyssum. You'll see maybe in some of the beds how I use alyssum. So let's see, where am I? So I like to start lettuce from seed and transplant it because it's really easy. And I need precision transplanting because I grow so much of it. I also like to plant it in fun patterns, which is sometimes difficult to do when you directly seed lettuce into the ground. With seedlings, I know exactly what's germinated and when it will mature. I can't afford to waste space on a seed that isn't going to germinate. So for me, things like lettuce, some other things, I definitely start from seed, even though you can direct seed it. So the second thing to remember is that all seeds need to be started at specific times because of their culture, time of transplant, and maturity windows. So your seedlings shouldn't be started all at one time. And it's really important not to start your seeds too early or too late. A seed started too early could lose vigor by becoming leggy or root bound, or both, and it will be less resistant to disease, and it won't grow well once it's transplanted. As I said, some plants just simply refuse to grow further if they're too old when they're planted as seedlings. So try not to pay attention to that guy who says he always starts his tomato seeds on January 1st and he has no problems with it. That's really great. I'm glad it works for him, but I really don't want to tend tomato seedlings for an extra 3 months. So I'm pretty lazy when it comes to it. The point of the picture that I'm showing here up on the slide is you can see plants planted at various stages of maturity. For example, in the row in the foreground, you can see broccoli plants planted to mature in a month and a half, and then broccoli plants planted to mature in 2 months, and then in the next row up, broccoli plants that are going to start heading up very, very soon. So I wanted you to see how it works. This is called succession planting. One of the other things, it's frustrating to read books or articles that give you only general information about planting and growing. Seeding and gardening is so climate dependent. Spring is a very different concept in Maine than it is in Florida, as we all know. Keep that in mind. Make sure if you find a chart listing when to start a seed that it applies to your location. Know your zone and also your microclimate. Something I can transplant out in Owl's Head in the last week of May might have to wait another week to be planted out up in Union. And as you become more experienced, you'll be able to adjust your planting time accordingly. I meant to include this really nifty chart that Jean English of MOFCA has, and I'll try to put it up at it. One of the things, well, you can't really see it. Yeah, but it tells you what plants you should grow for around here. So for example, it says May 1st, start melons, squashes, and cucumbers, which is when I do it. So things like that are really handy online. The third thing is learning what plants will last an entire planting season and which ones will need to be planted more than once a season or succession planted. For example, if you want lettuce all summer, you need to start a few plants every couple of weeks all through the season. One group of lettuce seedlings started in May will poop out by June. You're not going to have them all summer long. So some flowers and many annual herbs also need to be planted in succession in order to get a good succession of bloom. Nigella is a good example of this because it flowers and then it sets the seeds. It's really beautiful. So here you can see in this lettuce that's planted to be harvested really quickly, and then the next crop. So we'll be eating the top lettuce this week, and in 2 weeks we'll be eating the bottom lettuce. So I'm going to try to post some of these charts on my website and on my Facebook pages so that you'll be able to see what I do and when I start things, etc. So your first great source of information is the seed catalog itself. Johnny's and High Mowing, for example, are excellent resources. There's a whole wealth of information hidden in seed catalogs, and I find them to be fascinating, and I could give a whole class on the hidden wonders of seed catalogs. But here we're just going to look for the information we need for starting seeds. For each vegetable, herb, or flower, a good catalog will give you general information about the plant you want to grow. Johnny's, for example, and here's a copy of one of their pages, gives you information on common and horticultural names, culture, days to maturity, direct seeding or transplanting, diseases and pests, harvest, storage, or display, and quantity of seeds in a packet. You'll also see information you don't necessarily need for now, like rates of seeding and production information, which is really geared for professionals and may not be useful for your garden or how you grow things. So here I've got the page from cucumbers. The pale green section up on the upper left is very important, and I've made it larger over on the right-hand side of the slide. It tells me a whole lot about how to grow cucumbers. Again, the more experienced you are as a gardener, the more you will get out of this. Culture, for example, tells this culture section down on the cucumber thing, tells me that I need to plant or transplant cucumber seedlings when the weather's warm and the danger of frost is gone. I know from experience that this is about the last week of May, first week of June for me in Owl's Head. Then I see Johnny's gives directions for both transplanting and direct seeding. That tells me that I can both start seeds for transplant or sow directly into the garden bed. Both categories, however, provide me with a lot more information. So let's focus on transplanting. This section tells me that I should use a fairly large container to start my cucumber seed. It says, do not disturb roots when transplanting. That's the key phrase that tells me this. So when I start cucumbers, I usually use a peat pot because I can plant it directly into the ground and I never touch the roots. It also tells me that I could use a larger plastic pot or something like that. Just make sure I have enough room not to screw the roots up. It also tells me that I need to allow 3 to 4 weeks for the seedling to grow to transplant size. So if I want to plant my first cucumber on June 1st, I will need to plant the seed in the container between April 24th and May 4th. So now that the transplanting section tells me a little more information that the seed container needs to be kept warm at 70 degrees or more during the day and cooler 60 degrees at night. This is important for germination. Don't worry about if your house goes to 65 in the daytime. If it goes to 50, that's a problem. If you're within the range, you can see at the bottom, the germination guide gives you a range of germination for this seed. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. The direct seeding and cultural information backs this up and says that cucumbers are a warm season crop, which tells me they should be planted out after the last frost when the temperature's above 50, if I'm directly seeding it. So there's the germination guide. And what's nifty about their germination guide, it also gives you a picture of what the seed looks like and its approximate size. And then if you look at transplanting, it gives you instructions on how to do that. So it says plant 1 to 2 seeds, plant 1 to 2 seeds in a 50 plug. We'll get into the size thing in a little bit more specifically later on. The only time I'll plant more than 1 seed in a container is if the seed is more than 1 year old. That will give me better germination. So I don't like to use more than 1 seed. This is my big opinion because I don't like to thin things and I don't like to waste seed. Depth is one of those things that you may find under things like direct seeding. For instance, says under direct seeding for the cucumber, it says 1/2 inch deep. So you'd plant in your peat pot in your starting container, that plant 1/2 inch deep. Now, days to maturity was an interesting concept, and it's the approximate time that a seed will need to grow and fruit or flower once it's planted. This is important for garden planning purposes. So it's a topic for another day, really, but each variety of plant has a specific date to maturity, which will be listed in the variety information. So you can see under slicing, Corinto, F1, blah, 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 48 days. That's Corinto's date to maturity. And then if you look under the big cucumber section, you'll see days to maturity from direct seeding. So that means if you plant Corinto on June 1st as a seed in 48 days, you should expect to have start harvesting cucumbers. If you were to plant a transplant, it says subtract 10 days. So your date from transplant would be 38 days. So you gain a couple of weeks, sometimes even more. Let's see where I am on this. So it gets more frustrating when you do something like kale, as you can see here on the left, which doesn't tell you you can plant or transplant. It wants you to go look at cabbage, but you can tell. You'll be able to tell a little bit more from this. DTM gives me information for both transplant and direct seeding timing, and culture tells me that I can do either and gives me the timing for seeding or planting starting in early spring. So from experience and observation, I have learned that kale can be transplanted out at the farm around the 3rd week of April, if the ground has thawed out enough for me to prepare it for planting. I've also learned through record keeping that kale is ready to be transplanted out in about 4 to 5 weeks after seeding. Unfortunately, you look on the right-hand side, Johnny's doesn't give the greatest info for flower starting, but here's an example. There's good information, just not a lot of it. You can look down for snapdragons down underneath at the bottom. So you'll look at other resources may give you more information. So I've gathered all this information from reading tons and tons of things and doing this every season. So let's look at seed packets. They're the next good source of seed starting information. A good seed company will include all or most of the information you need right on the packet. So here's a packet for Jasper tomato, one of my very favorite cherry tomatoes. So the front of the packet on the left tells you the variety name, the horticultural name, Solanum lycopersicum, whether the seed is hybrid or open pollinated. So if you see F1 or F2, F1 is usually what it is. That indicates that it's a hybrid seed, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And if the seed's organically certified, as you can see, this Jasper is, which means the seed has been grown organically. And the packet also tells you if the seed is pelleted, coated, or treated, or any other information. So you'll see the number of seeds in the packet. Johnny's is very general. Usually you get 18, you get a few more seeds than are in there. Gives you the days to maturity. The days to maturity on lettuce are tricky. So you have to refer back to the catalog to make sure that you're not, that's from direct seeding. One of the things I like about this, it gives you a lot more information. I don't like companies that don't provide this information, and that I won't buy from certain seed companies because of that. What's missing on this is a certain crucial bit of information that Johnny's usually includes. And you can see on the label stuck on the back of this old lettuce packet that it has a 99% germination rate for this seed. This is a bit of information is based on the seed supplier's testing. So it's the approximate percentage of seeds that when you plant, that will definitely germinate. For example, if a seed has a germination rate of 98%, you can expect that if you plant 100 of the seeds, 98 of them will germinate. You'll have 2 duds. Of course, few people, except farmers, plant hundreds of seedlings, but germination percentage is even more important when you're only planting a few seeds, because you're going to plant 10. If you need 10 seedlings and you only have 98% germination percentage, you're going to need to plant 12 or 14 in order to get enough seedlings for your needs. So just keep that in mind. This was an important lesson early in my gardening career. Most seeds have great germination, but there are some, like hot peppers, that are more difficult to germination or take longer. So the other thing about germination percentages is they decrease every year as the seed loses more and more viability. So 99% the first year, maybe 92% the second year, maybe 85%. So that's when I start planting more than one seed in a container. Now, one of the things about a seed container is it'll tell you, this back of the seed will tell you if the seed needs to be soaked ahead of time or treated or inoculated or something like that. So read carefully, you'll learn an awful lot. Now, the other thing I like about seed packets is you can keep a lot of information on them. And you can see Newham here is organic, and it's a specialty, specially propagated. It's a green little gem. It's a full season, which means I've written this on, I can grow it all season long. It's not going to get bitter in the summer unless it gets really hot. It has a minimum of 500 seeds. And as we seed, we keep giving it crossing things off. And then you can see that this is seed from 2019. Yeah, 2019. So 2018, so it'll say 11/17 was the test date, so I know that it's seed prepared for the next year. So seeds themselves come in all shapes, sizes, and types. In addition, they're often sold with coatings or other treatments that help the seed germinate or aid in its sowing. So on the upper left in my palm are coated seeds, and they are little onion seeds. If you've ever tried to sow an onion seed in a bed, they're black and they're tiny. So having this white coating on them makes them super easy to sow. On the right-hand side is a pelleted seed, and that is usually an organically compliant coating of clay or something else that often contains germination accelerators. And pelleted seeds are really great for use in mechanical seeders, in running things down a row. They're also great for things like carrots when you're planting them out, because carrots are notoriously difficult germinators. They are very, very fussy plants. Lettuce seed is often can be pelleted. I really love pelleted seed for the most part because it just makes it really easy. On the bottom is a treated seed. Now, some seeds are treated with fungicides and pesticides so that when they're growing, they won't be affected by a fungus or a soil fungus or a special insect. One of the things that's really, really important to remember with your seeds is never eat them. Never use a sunflower seed to cook in the, from a seed packet, I should say. If you're gathering your own seed from your sunflowers, go ahead. But don't eat a seed. You don't really know how it's been treated. So organic seeds are grown using organic practices and are certified by some organization like MAFCA. They're really only necessary if you're trying for organic certification as a commercial grower, or you want that extra assurance of organic treatment. Hybrid seeds are the offspring of two other varieties. So if you're trying to save seed, hybrid seed will not come true to what it was originally. It will show up as one of its parents or some other weird combination. Open pollinated seeds are varieties that should breed true if you save them, except for some plants when they're grown with very close relatives. For example, squashes and pumpkins and melons are the profligates of the plant vegetable community, and they will cross with everything within their family group. So any C. pepos or C, any of those, if you're trying to save seed, you have to be very, very careful about that. So some seeds are called decorticated, and that means they've had their seed coat removed or abraded just to make them easier to germinate. And some seeds are poisonous. So the plant, and some, as are the plants that they produce often. Treated seeds are, as I said, are usually poisonous. Plants like larkspur and sweet peas are poisonous. So be very careful around them, especially with pets and children. I'm very careful when I seed them, but usually the seed packet will tell you that the seed is poisonous. So I think this is most of the general background you need to begin starting your own seeds. There are other related topics we can discuss, like planning and record keeping, but again, those are best for a later date. So we need to discuss planning just a little bit. You need to plan how many seedlings you'll need, when you want to transplant them, and thus when they should be started. You'll also want to keep track of what you plant and when, and make sure enough germinate for your needs. So seed starting really begins with garden planning. Again, too extensive a topic for today. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. So your seeding success will come from a number of factors. First is proper soil. Second is proper containers. Third is proper seeding depth, planting the seed at the right depth. Proper temperatures for germination and growing on. Proper watering, proper light, and proper timing of starting that seed. So here's what you need now that you have your seeds and some idea of their needs. So this is some, I just wanted to throw this in. These are some seedlings heading off to the farm: peppers, eggplant, and tomatoes. So let's start with soil. Oh, this is a really fraught topic, and everybody has their own opinion. Pay attention to the good gardeners you know out there and good garden writers when they recommend seed starting mixes. Georgine Davis had a great recipe in last week's free press, which was a very good one. I am too lazy and I need too much. So I use, I sort of jumped the gun here. So there are lots of really good mixes out on the market. You can go to a good garden store and find a good starting mix. Johnny's has them, Vermont Castings has them, all that. There are mixes you can find in gardening articles and gardening books. Don't buy crappy soil. You will regret it. There are some sold out there in garden stores and in places like Ocean State or Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's. Most of those commercial mixes aren't very good. For instance, I personally would never use a quote unquote Miracle Grow type. I hope they don't sue me, but I wouldn't use it. And I really can't emphasize this enough because you put a lot of time and energy into your seeding. One year I had crew waiting in the barn to do seeding. I ran out of what I use for soil mix. And then of course, I had to run around and I got this junk somewhere. And the seeds planted in that soil just didn't grow very well at all. They were weak, they were sickly, they didn't germinate quickly. So do yourself a favor and get very good soil. Proper soil is light, it has a good feel, doesn't smell like sawdust, doesn't have a lot of crap in it. I'm sorry for the expression. Vermiculite and perlite are good additions. So what I'm showing you here is what I like to use. I buy organic Pro Mix by the bale. It's expensive, but it's very high quality. And then I add a little bit of the Little River compost, which is in my hand on the right. It's just a wonderful light product. You don't need a soil that contains fertilizers. Seeds don't really need a lot of nutrition to start off with. Everything a seed needs, it contains. I think it's a needless expense to start fertilizing right at the get-go. So, but I will, however, sometimes use an organic fertilizer in a weak solution. Like there's a wonderful Espoma product out there called Start. As well, you can use kelp meal, kelp solutions or fish solutions. But again, do it as part of your watering in a weak solution. So let's talk about containers. So you want containers that aren't too large or too small for your intended seedling. You can use all sorts of things. People like to use eggshells, egg cartons, yogurt containers, milk cartons, anything that they have hanging around. If you only have a few seedlings to start, this is a really great and inexpensive way to start. Just make sure that what you use is the proper size and is clean. So as you gain experience, you might want to transition to using soil blocks of various types as shown here from the Johnny's catalog. These are really great. They don't have any waste and they help to air train roots, which is sort of an advanced concept. They can be delicate and tough to make properly, but they're a good option. Some people like to broadcast their seeds in flats of soil and then pick out the seedlings to pot onto 6-packs or other containers. This method is great if you're really short on growing space and need to start a lot of seedlings all at once. Professionals use this method because they have workers to do the potting up, and they use germination chambers, which are like little hot boxes, to get the seeds off to a quick start. Again, it's worth trying, but I personally can't be bothered because I don't have the time. And again, I don't want to waste seed. So I prefer to use plastic 6-pack containers in various sizes, similar plastic containers of various sizes, and peat pots. And I do these right from the start. The size of the container depends on what size of the seedling will be, or if it will require special handling, as we discussed with things that needed their roots not to be disturbed. So in a smaller container, like the upper left, which is what I call a 72, because there are 72 seedlings in a flat, I start lettuces, leeks, onions, celery chard, collards, dandelion, frise endive, escarole, kale, radicchio, Chinese and Napa cabbages, basils, leaf fennel and dill, China asters, calendula, cosmos, celosia, centaurea, gomphrena, escoltia, larkspur, marigolds, nigella, salvia, scabiosa, snapdragon, stock, and zinnias. So these are, there are 12 6-packs to a flat, and then you can get them 48 6-packs to a flat or 60 6-packs to a flat, or then you can use like these the dark one, big one in the center, and they fit in flats too. So I also start tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and tomatillo off in 72s, but I'll tell you what I do with them after they germinate. In the larger containers, I plant broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbages, cauliflower, ornamental millets, and amaranth, also rudbeckia, for example, you know, the big thugs of plants, seedlings. Single containers or 4-packs I use for those seedlings I don't need a lot of, like tomatillos, if I'm going to do that, only one of them, and I'm not selling them as seedlings. And then I use small and large peat pots for seedlings that don't like to be transplanted, like sunflowers, or things like squash, melons, and cucumbers that I don't grow in huge quantities and need more space for their roots. And I like the small ones for dwarf sunflowers, zucchini, summer squash, cucumbers, and the like. And I prefer to use the large ones for winter squashes, sweet peas, watermelons, large sunflowers, for example. I like to use 6-packs and flats because they save space and they're easy to use efficiently. Also, they fit perfectly on heat mats and they're easy to cover with plastic domes for moisture and heat retention, which you'll see. So I use open plastic flats like the ones on the bottom on the right, in the seed houses, which I'll show you in a minute, because that allows water to drain through and I don't really care about a mess. On the upper part of it though, I use those for starting seeds in the house when I don't want water dripping all over my formal dining room floor. And I use those for peat pots too, because peat pots lose moisture more rapidly than 6-packs. And then that helps them retain their moisture. And yeah, I really, really hate the waste of plastic. And when I get my big greenhouse built, I'm going to all seed blocks. Now, all these are available locally. Usually, you know, don't take my word for it. Use what you like to use, but this is what I found success with. Okay, tools. I have every tool, every seeding tool available on the market. I've tried to use the ones up on the left and I can't get it. I can't do it the way I like to do it. When I get in, maybe when I get into really specialty sowing of the really tiny flower seeds and things like that, I bet they'll come in handy. And professional growers use these all the time. And they also have these neat vacuum seeders that will seed an entire flat at once. So the best tool, in my opinion, and the one I use pretty exclusively, is a simple bamboo skewer from your kitchen drawer, marked in 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, and 1.5 inch increments, as you can see here on the bottom right. It has a blunt end and a pointed end, and we'll see later on how you use them. I also use a clear dish that has a little bit of a side to hold the seeds, and I pick the seeds out from that, as you'll see later on. So markers, you'll want to need to mark your containers with the name of your seed and the date you started it at a minimum. I also include other information. So wooden markers tend to deteriorate really quickly, although I do use them out in the beds at the farm because I want to be able to compost them. I use these little plastic ones that you can buy in bags of 50 or 100 all the time. And you can see on the blank ones, the 3 up at the top, that they've had information written on them before. So being a cheap Yankee, I use these over and over again. Use pencil on them. Don't use Sharpie. Once you put your seeds outside to harden off, the Sharpie will fade. Pencil doesn't fade and pencil's easily removed. I just use a regular eraser while I watch hockey. And you can disinfect these and they're just really, really great. And I have tubs and tubs of them. Lights. So you can see here on the left, you can buy fancy growing lights. You can go get fluorescent fixtures and add growing bulbs. If you have a very, very bright windowsill, you may not need this, but if you're growing your seedlings down in the cellar or on shelves, you'll want to get some lights. You want to keep the lights about 3 inches off the seedlings. I use to do seeding, I use my needlepoint or my handwork, one of my handwork lamps, which has handy magnifiers for those of us who can't see anymore, and a very, very bright focused light. So it has a fun feature where I can put it on a tabletop instead of having it just on the floor. The other thing is I find that I don't need to use lights because when I only germinate peppers, eggplant, and peppers and eggplant inside. So they get enough sufficient light to germinate and start. Once they're all germinated, I'll show you, I move them into the seed house. The seed houses are outside, they're covered in plastic, and they get plenty of light. You may not have the ability to do that, but I'll show you some nifty things you can buy. These are the two tools I use for watering initially for the seedling. The thing at the top is a misting sprayer, and you fill it with water and you pump it up, and then you just water your plants like that. It's great because it doesn't have a lot of force. So you're not going to disturb the seeds in this potting mix. There are some seeds like marigolds and snapdragons that like to be planted right on the surface of the soil. And if you put your hose sprayer on that, they're gonna be gone with the water. So I also have a cool number of cool wands with different sizes of roses at the end. Some with larger, to make a larger spray, and some with very small spray. So it's a very gentle spray. And the way you water is with you want to regulate your water pressure. So once they reach a decent size and I don't have to worry about them, I just use watering cans or a hose with the spray nozzle, especially once they go outside to harden off. So where are you going to put your containers once they're seeded? So you actually have a lot of options. If you have the means, a greenhouse is wonderful. But because I start so many, I designed and built these nifty seed houses from dimensional lumber, plastic panels, and plastic sheeting. So I designed them so that seed flats fit perfectly inside. As you can see here on the right, it has two sides of places for the seed flats. And I heat them with a little buddy heat propane heater at night. As you can see there down on the bottom, it's put on a couple of cement blocks just for protection. The propane tanks are outside along the back or along the side, as you can see. These are great because they heat up they keep the seedlings warm at night. During the daytime, I rarely have to use the little buddy heaters because there's so much solar gain in the seed house. I do monitor it. I have to make sure, in fact, that it doesn't get too hot in there. So each end of most of the seed houses, I try to put 2 doors in, and then in the upper corners are flaps that can be opened or closed and adjusted. So even in late February, March, and April, I don't need to heat them during the day. So you can make simple starting areas in a bright southern window. You can purchase shelving units with rolling feet and make them into things, or you can buy these nifty things, as you can see on the left. They can be expensive, as you can see, but once you get into it, they really make a difference. Now, using cold frames for starting seeds is one of the more advanced techniques that we don't have time for today. So bottom heat. Seeds like peppers, both hot and sweet, and eggplant need heat to germinate. So in our cold springs, use heat mats under your flats. You can purchase these at any good garden center or online. And it's nice to have temperature regulators for them, but you don't really need them. So I start, as I said, peppers and eggplant in the house on shelves or on folding tables. And if they're on shelves, I put pieces of plywood underneath so that it retains the heat and it doesn't go down. It doesn't get lost underneath. So once the flats are sown, I also put plastic domes over them to retain moisture and to retain the warmth. And that helps the peppers and eggplant germinate more quickly. Once I get about 98% germination, at least 5 or 6 germinated in each seed flat, those 6 packs go right out to the seed house. So it's really important to practice good sanitation when you're tending your seedlings. Wash your hands, make sure the soil doesn't get too damp, make sure there's enough air circulation around your containers. If you're a smoker, it's really important to keep your hands washed because tobacco carries a lot of diseases that directly affect tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, the other plants in the tobacco native, they're all cousins. So you have to be really careful of stuff like that. You have to keep your equipment clean. I clean and sterilize everything before I start the season, which means that my kitchen's a mess for 2 weeks. But it really, really makes a difference. And I've never had damping off issues and never any insect problems, except the only problem I have is mice like to get into the outside sweet peas and eat the sweet pea seeds. So you also have to worry about with mice things like melons and watermelon and sunflowers. They love to dig into the ground, into the soil and get that. So let's get into the whole process since we're running out of time here. So I start off with, I dump the soil I'm using into a big container. I really like these cement mixing tubs that you can get at Spears. So on the left, you can see ProMix, and on the right, you can see some Little River compost. And then I'm going to mix that all together, and I'm going to wet it down with some warm water. This time of year, when you're starting your leek seeds, you're going to really appreciate, if you're out in your barn or your garden shed, you're going to appreciate having the warm water. As well, you can see I sometimes wear gloves, just helps to keep things warmer. So once you get your soil mixed, you want your soil to be wet enough that when you hold it in your hand, it forms a little clump, but dry enough that it falls apart. So you can see the consistent, I wish I could show you, it's something that you're going to feel and you're going to get with more experience. And there's really not, I have to tell you, there's nothing like going out on a cold day, smelling that soil with the warm water in it and mushing your hands around. Then I fill the containers, as you can see on the left, up to the top. I'm not to the brim.
Yep.
And don't tamp the soil down so that it's tight. Seeds need air to grow their roots. So they actually use oxygen in the soil as they grow. So you want to give your plants enough, your seeds enough soil to grow and enough lightness, but you want the seed to be it's one of those things that you'll learn. So I like to fill a bunch at a time and I set them aside. And then when I go to get ready to seed, you can see at the bottom right-hand side, I have my 6-pack, I have my seeds. These are lettuce seeds. Put in my little dish. I have my seed packet and I've made up my marker because I don't want to forget what I've done. Let's see where I have to get right back into this. Okay, so one of the things, let's see. So you're going to fill your container. So you get out your seeds and your seeding plans and your note-taking materials because you want to take notes as you go, like 1 6-pack of Jasper tomato, the date and maybe which you planted it in or the year of the seed. Sometimes that helps if you have a germination issue. It may be because you've used seed from 2016 and 2021 and you go, oh, duh. Write on a plant marker for each container you'll be planting. This is especially important. I also include other information. So I do so many sowings that I want to make sure that the first lettuce crop I'm going to put into the ground for transplant is like seeding number 1, and then seeding number 2 goes in the next time. So that's important. You want to be really careful with the seed packet. Most are made to reseal, but in order to do this, you have to make sure that the sealing part, the sticky stuff, doesn't get dirty, and you have to be careful you don't tear the tab. And I use paper clips on every packet to make sure that it stays closed in storage. So you're going to carefully pour your seeds into the little plate. And this makes it easier to see the seeds and pick them up for planting. So depending on the size of the seed, use your fingers or a tool to place the seed into the soil of the container. So you can see on the top, I've used the pointy end of my bamboo stick that I've licked. Or you can use a little dish of water. When my crew works, they use little dishes of water. You don't want it wet, but you want it tacky enough that it will pick the seed up. So then you can see on the right, I'm taking that seed and I'm going to tuck it right under the surface of the soil, because a seed like lettuce only wants to be about 1/8 of an inch deep. So I just tuck the seed right under. For a bigger seed, like a pepper seed on the bottom right, I use the blunt end of the bamboo stick. Again, I make sure that it's a little damp so the seed's easy to pick up, as you can see there from the dish. And then this is where those nifty lines on the skewer come in handy. I push the seed into the soil up to the depth it requires. So you can see it on the right-hand bottom. I'm pushing the seed in up to the 1/4 depth. And that's just really helps me. There's really no guesswork once I do that. So this is where seeding depth is important, and this is how you get it done. So the next thing is, after you get the seed planted, you want to lightly tap the surface of the soil to make sure that the seed's in contact with the soil and that you don't have an open hole or something from when you've used your skewer. Then you put your tag in the side of your container, and you put it in whatever you're storing it in, and then you move it to your starting location. So one of the important things that I learned about seed planting depth is that seeds need different amounts of light for germination. Some seeds, like nasturtium, don't like a lot of light. They don't want to be close to the surface. They want to be pretty deep, according to the thing. Another good rule of thumb is this: depending on the size of the seed, that can give you a good indication of how deep it should be planted. If you don't have information available. So for example, if you have a seed like a lettuce seed, you plant it right under it. It's funny when you get to kale and other crucifer seeds, because they want to be planted, even though they're small, they want to be planted about 1/4 inch deep. But you can find all kinds of charts out there for seed planting depth, so we won't necessarily get into the specifics. For large seeds, you can just pick up the seed and put it on top of the soil and then use your skewer to press it in. For things like melons, I just push it in with my finger sometimes, and then I cover them back. So then you're going to pour the seed back into the seed packet, make sure you get them all in, and there are no ones left over in the dish to get mixed up with another variety. A lot of seeds it's impossible to tell apart in their families. So a kale seed looks like a collard seed, looks like a broccoli seed, looks like a cauliflower seed, looks like a cabbage seed. So don't mix them up. So, and I said, try to keep the seed packet clean and dry, and we saw how I record information on that. Then just, make sure your seedling has light, make sure it stays properly watered. So I want to show you, there's some beautiful little kale seedlings. Seeds have seed leaves, and then they have their first true leaves. So these are kale seeds just starting up, and you'll see, let me see if I can, so you can see here, these are pepper seeds on the left-hand side. The ones on the bottom have their seed leaves. And if you look at the taller peppers in the back, you can see those little tiny leaves starting to come up in the center of the stem. Those are the first true leaves. So with peppers and eggplant and tomatillo and tomatoes, once they get their first true leaves, I do something called potting on or planting on. And you can see on the right are tomato seedlings that have been planted on to larger pots. Peppers and eggplant should be planted at the same depth they were in the 6-pack in the 4-inch pot. Tomatoes you can plant right up to the bottom of the first leaves. The deeper you plant it, the more roots it will get. And the same will hold true when you transplant it out into the garden. There are 5 or 6 million different techniques for planting tomatoes. You've seen the trench planting, et cetera, et cetera. Tomatoes are a vine, and they're just really, they're a wonderful plant. They're a lot of fun to grow. So here are tomato seedlings, even more mature, and they're really happy and they're ready to go. They're in their 4-inch pots, and we're going to start doing something called hardening off. The seed packets should give you information. We'll give you some information about hardening off. You can't take a tender plant right from the house or the seed house or the cold frame and put it into the ground without some damage to the plant, because that seedling isn't used to those conditions. So you have to get the seedling used to those conditions. So starting about a week before you're planning to plant your seedlings out, you're going to bring them outside into the sun and the breeze and the regular temperatures, and you're going to let them be out there for a couple of hours. And every day after that, you're going to leave them out a little bit longer and a little bit longer. If the weather's really, really cold, leave them inside. But a normal thing, these are all tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and then you see sweet peas, which I started outside here. They're all hardening off and getting ready to go to the farm. It is a chore to bring them inside and outside twice a day, but it's really worth it. So you want to keep good records. And this is sort of a placeholder, but this is nasturtium I grew from seed. Nasturtium's really, really easy to grow from seed, and there are so many varieties available. So keep good records so you can learn from your experiences. I keep very detailed ones because I'm a commercial farmer. Someday I'd like to give a class on record keeping for the garden and planning for the garden, but not today. So write down what worked, write down what didn't work. When did your seeds first germinate, and when were they all germinated in that 6-pack? So when did you start hardening them off, and how did you fertilize them? What did you fertilize them with? When did you fertilize them? When did you transplant them out? These are all things that you can use from year to year. So you know what works, you know what to do next year. And it's kind of fun to look from year to year. And the other thing is take lots of photographs so that you have them from year to year, so you know what you did and you remember. So somebody asked about saving seeds, and it's really a topic for another day. It is a pretty interesting thing. And there's a quote from George Washington that says, "If you don't save your seed, you're poor. If you don't save your own seed, you're poor." So I always like that. And someday, when I have the time, I will do that. I do save nasturtium seeds and sunflower seeds. And one of the nicest things, we all inadvertently do save seeds, because when calendula, for example, will self-sow nasturtium, I'm always pulling nasturtium seedlings out of a bed where it doesn't belong, or tomato seedlings. So once you master the basic techniques, it's time to start some interesting things, and stratifying seeds and using cold frames and doing all kinds of stuff and starting the more difficult plants. So next year for that. So I hope this answered some of your questions. It dispersed some of the mystery. There's a lot of information here today, and I hope you'll jump in and give it a try. But if you have any questions or comments, you can email me. You can also go to my website, which is always under construction. And on Facebook, I have a couple of Facebook pages, Headacre Farm and Petit Potager. And then you can see those lovely calendula up on the top, which you can start from seed. And then you can see those little, over on the left, you'll see the blooms starting to go to seed. So that's when you start looking to collect your own. So thanks very much.
And thank you, Anne. And we have quite a few questions. So
Okay, great.
It's great that she has her information up on the screen for the garden club now too. And after a couple minutes, Anne, if you wouldn't mind going back to the screen that has your information too, in case we aren't able to get to all these questions.
Okay, great.
All right, all the compliments are coming in. So I'm going to fly back up to the top. And we had a question from Ellen that says, do you buy seed from the Wild Seed Project?
Yes, I will be buying seed from the Wild Seed Project, because one of my jobs this year is at my house here in Thomaston. I have over 4.5 acres. Part of that'll be formal garden and potager with varietals, and my dear friend Cindy Lang's going to kill me for that, the non-natives. But I do have almost 4 acres that I want to return to native plants. So one of the things I'll be doing is getting some of the Wild Seed Project plants, and Cindy was kind enough to give me a membership to that, which I encourage you all to get. Their publication is fabulous. And we really do need to start focusing on natives and pollinators.
Excellent, thank you. And if anyone's interested, last week's program was on native plants, and you can find the recording on the Camden Public Library program.
Yes, I corralled those ladies into coming. I think it's a very, very important topic.
Thank you. It was a great talk. Okay, Joette asks, what about the seeded pellets that come in kits?
Like a wildflower bomb, herb bomb, wildflower bomb that you toss out into a.
She didn't clarify too much, but what do you think about that?
I think it really depends on where you get it and the quality of the seed. So for example, I hate to keep using Johnny's, but they're a very, very reliable supplier. You can buy butterfly mixes or bee feeding mixes that you can plant like that. I think if you buy them from a really good quality seed supplier or garden supplier, and they are appropriate for our climate, they may be fun to try. I am a big fan of experimenting with just about everything, except maybe a plant that somebody from China sent me seeds from. Remember the seeds from China scare?
Yes.
Those seeds I would never plant.
Yes, be suspicious of unlabeled mail that has seeds in it.
Right.
Okay, May says, last year I grew more than one type of winter squash in the same family near each other and saved seed from them. I have tested and they are viable, they do sprout, but heard that the fruit could be compromised. I hate to throw out all this seed if there's any chance that they could produce decent squash. Would you avoid using these?
I personally would, but again, if she has a spot that she can put them in, might be kind of fun. You don't know what you're going to get. That's the wonder of hybridization and seed starting. But the problem with the cucurbits is that they're to pardon the expression, but they're sluts. And they will cross with every other one of the same family. Now, if she grew a C. moscata or a C. pepo, and then one of the other, a C. maxima, they're the same family, but they're cousins, but they're not closely related enough, and they usually don't cross. So if you're going to grow 3 C. pepos, they're going to cross.
Okay.
So you could grow 1 C. pepo.
Okay. Jim says, what do you think of the Miracle Grow Aero Garden Smart Countertop Garden? Being Miracle Grow, I think I know what your answer will be. Still, what do you think?
Those cute little tabletop gardens are kind of neat, and especially in the winter time. My stepmother had one for a couple of years, and she had great fun doing things like basil and the other stuff like that. I think they're fun to play around with and do things with. I'm not familiar enough with that specific product, but if you have the room on your counter and it's an inside thing and you want to try it, why not?
Go for it. Keep you busy in the wintertime, right?
Right. The great thing about that is it gives you a little bit of greenery. You're not going to get a lot of production, but you're going to get something. And there's nothing like a fresh sprig of basil that you've grown yourself in January.
Absolutely. Cora says, what about homemade newspaper or toilet roll pots?
Oh yeah, I didn't mention that. That's a fabulous thing to do. And the important thing there, newspaper is great to use in a garden. Just as long, you don't want the shiny paper and you don't want a whole lot of colored inks. Newspaper ink is usually soy-based. So for instance, in my paths at the farm and here at the house, I like to lay down a number of layers of newspaper and then top that with mulch. I think the paper pots are just a really, really good idea. And in fact, some growers now use these expandable paper pots, and then they can transplant right into the soil with these paper pots. They don't have to use a plunge planter or something like that. But yes, definitely. And I'm going to make a note to include that in my next talk if I give one. So thank you very much.
Oh, before we go on to the next question, would you mind just shifting back to the previous slide that had your
Sure.
website and contact information in case
Wanna do
anyone
that?
didn't
There
get a
you go.
chance to jot that down? Perfect.
There you go.
We had a number of questions about sterilizing, but Barb's question was, can 6-packs from nurseries be reused after sterilizing?
That's a really good question. I don't know how much. Oh, there are greenhouses that don't use pesticides. I think they really only use them if they have a pest problem. I have reused them in the past. After I've cleaned them, they're very fragile, unfortunately. So sometimes they tear. I think if I wash them very carefully, I would. I don't think that there's any problem with that. I just would make sure they're clean.
So, and in that same vein of sterilization, we had someone ask about how do you disinfect the little plastic markers that you were talking about cleaning.
Right.
And
right.
We did get a response from another one of the participants. I think they suggested a 1 to 10 bleach solution. Did
exactly. Yeah. So what I do is I have a dish pan. I get a dish pan. I fill it with hot water and with a 10% bleach solution, like you would do for your bird feeders or stuff like that. I swish the markers around in there. I also have I use a little bit of soap product that won't react with the bleach. And I just swish the things around, and then I just let them sit for a little while, and then rinse them, drain them, rinse them, lay them out to dry, and put them in a big tub and sit with a cookie sheet and an eraser and watch hockey.
Perfect. Sounds like a good time. Rosanna says that some suggest using boiling water to kill any insect eggs that might be in the soil. Do you recommend this?
I think if you buy a good commercial potting mix or seed starting mix, you won't have issues with insects in the soil. I think the hard part comes with when you have an open bag of compost, Little River compost in your barn, and your barn mice have gotten into your chicken feed and planted little plants in your open bag of Little River compost, and you open it up to find a forest in there. That's where you really have to be careful. But I think that the boiling water would kill more beneficial microbes than it would help kill insects. You really shouldn't have any insect problems.
Okay, that's
why usually people you shouldn't use garden soil. You should use a prepared soil, and you can mix that up. Garden soil you do have to sterilize because it does have all kinds of stuff in it.
Okay. And Susan says, could you talk about nicking seeds to help them germinate?
Right. So some seeds, especially things like sweet peas, have a very hard shell coating. And you'll read on the seed packet that it will recommend either soaking or nicking. And there are a couple of ways to do this, and it's very frustrating sometimes. You can rub the seed on a piece of sandpaper, or you can use a nail file or emery board if you hold it in your hand. But that, of course, also means you're going to, rub your fingertips. The other thing you can do is you can use something like a nail clipper and try to nick through the seed. You don't want to necessarily hit the inside of the seed, but what you want to do is you want to make it a little bit clear, make a little bit easier path for the seed to grow.
Okay, thank you. That's
And
helpful.
the seed packets will recommend scarifying or freezing or soaking your seeds.
Okay. Rosanna asks, how often do you water? Better put, when do you know it's time to water?
It depends on the seedling. So every morning, what I do is I go out to the seed house and I look at each individual flat. There are some flowers like marigolds and snapdragons, and there'll be other ones that are planted on the top of the soil, and the soil has to be kept moist. So those things you're going to want to check a couple of times a day. Once in the morning and once at night is usually sufficient. I like to water in the morning because I don't like my seedlings to be cold and wet at night. When the surface of the soil starts to look dry is a generally good rule of thumb. You want the seeds moist enough that they'll germinate and then they'll get the moisture that they need to swell and grow, but you don't want the seeds, you want so much moisture that the seed rots. I hope that's a good answer.
Okay, and Jim asks, what do you think of covering outside seedlings with that white sheet material stretched over hoops?
That's a great thing. Unfortunately, row cover only gains you 5 or 10 degrees during 5 or 10 degrees of warmth in the soil, and you have to make sure that your soil is warm enough for the seed to germinate. That's why people use cold frames. That's the old way of doing things, where you had a physical box, and in fact they'd use manure at the bottom of it to generate heat for the seedlings to grow. But once things get into the ground, row cover is really terrific for as an insect barrier, and also to gain 5 or 10 degrees of heat.
All right, thank you. Lisa asks, do you cover the seed flats until seeds sprout or keep them in the dark?
No, I don't cover the seed flats. Sometimes I will cover, for instance, a nasturtium flat with newspaper just because I want it to be a little darker. But I don't, if a seed is planted at the proper depth, it won't need dark. The only reason I cover a seed flat is to make sure that it stays moist and it stays warm. So when, for instance, I'm starting a greens mix out in the seed house, until those seeds germinate, I have one of those plastic domes on it. Once they germinate, I whip that off. Too much light can be bad sometimes. So for instance, when I'm talking about starting seed mixes for microgreens, I have to make sure that they're shaded because they're grown all through the summer and the seed house gets pretty hot, and too much sun will kill the seedlings. You just have to make sure where they are. You have to monitor them so they don't get too much light, too much sun. I often will start things in the top of the seed house. The hot things go up there. So I start the basil seeds on the top row, and then that's where the tomatoes and peppers and eggplant seedlings go. But I don't put kale up there, for example. Kale will go down towards the bottom of the seed house because it needs cooler temperatures. And I do have thermometers all in various places in my seed houses. I keep a minimum maximum thermometer in there to record the high temperature and the low temperature for the day. But to figure out where the optimal placement of a seedling flat is, I look at the thermometer that's down at the bottom, or the one that's in the middle, or the one that's up high away from the heater, that kind of a thing.
Okay, we do have to wrap up, but I'm going to do like 2 more questions real quick.
Okay.
And
people can email me if they'd like to.
Perfect. Okay, and Laura asks, do you plant out by average air temperature or by soil temperature?
I do both. soil temperature is really the most important thing, because as you can see, if you look at the Johnny's catalog, your seeds and your plants are going to be happier at a particular timing. And the other thing I found is that trying to push the season doesn't always work. So if the soil is unusually cold, the third week of May, for example, and I want to plant out tomatoes, those tomatoes are going to sit and they're not going to start growing until they feel that it's right. So sometimes you, in a cold spring, you can plant stuff out on your regular schedule and you're wondering, why the heck aren't these things growing? Like last year, it was the peppers took forever to take off for some reason, and I don't know why. But it's more important for nighttime temperatures. So for example, if you're going to plant out Chinese cabbage, you want to make sure that nighttime temperatures aren't going to go below 50, because that will cause them to bolt and go to seed. Lettuces, if it's too hot and they're not shaded, if you plant something like black seeded Simpson, which is a spring or fall, a cold preferring lettuce, if you plant that in July, you're going to get a bitter mess. So you can try planting it in the shade, which is one way to do it. Or what I do with my summer lettuces for my July and August crops is I will plant them behind my cucumber trellises, because the cucumbers growing up the trellises shade the lettuce plants, even though there are lots of great lettuces now for summer heat, like the Batavias.
All right, and the last and probably the most important question, can people visit your farm, and do you sell seedlings and produce to the public?
Yeah, I do. The farm, I don't own the farm. It's I rent the land from my dear friend, Carrie, and I've done that for 12 years, but you can come to the farm. You can email me when we get to it, and I'll be happy to show you around. I'd love to be able to show people how to do things out there, and I'd like to transition the farm to that. I do sell seedlings, and if you're interested, you can contact me on my email address. I also sell my produce and seedlings down in Martinsville, down Route 131 on the way to Port Clyde, and at the farmers market at the Ocean View Grange, which starts in late May and goes to September.
And do you know if that's
on Tuesday mornings?
Do you know if that's going to be happening this year with COVID and everything?
Yeah, we actually had a great season last year, even with COVID. People were very careful about wearing masks. My assistant and I both wore masks. We had the other vendors and I had lots of sanitizer and wipes, and we had baskets that people would put stuff in. We also would pick the stuff for people rather than have them paw through things. It worked out very, very well, and it was really rewarding to see how many people were what I'm trying to say, were conscientious enough to wear masks when they came. But it worked out very well, so we will be there this year.
Well, that's
and
excellent
as well
news.
at the farm for my farm share customers and the occasional person who comes to buy at the farm. We always have masks and gloves available there too, as well as hand sanitizer.
And you're located in Owl's Head, is that correct?
In Owl's Head. And the best way to get in touch with me and to find out how to get there is to email me.
All right. Thank you, Anne, so much. Thank you for all the
Thanks
work.
everyone for your patience. I realize that I went a really long time.
Oh, but it's all good information.
About that.
No, it's fine. It's great information. And again, thank you so much for all the work you put into helping to coordinate these talks, all of them.
Oh, it's so much fun.
Absolutely. And we enjoyed and learned so much. Again, the Garden Club Talks, we have a number of the recordings on the Camden Public Library Program's YouTube channel. I also encourage you to visit the Garden Club website. There it is right there. Get on their mailing list, join the Garden Club. They do lots of fun things, and they're just a really important part of our community.
We really have a lot of fun. It's a great group of men and women, mostly women. And we wear gloves and hats when we garden, is what I always say.
Yes, it's wonderful. And thank you for the work you do for that. All right, folks, that's it. Please visit librarycamden.org if you're interested in seeing what other upcoming library programs we have. They're free, they're open to everyone, and we do them all the time. So with that, I wish Anne a great rest of her day and all of you as well. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Deborah.